want to understand what it meant by fostering innovation and how fostering innovation in your organization can lead to greater opportunities. This session is moderated by industry veteran Mr. Pradeep Gupta. Pradeep is a founder and chairman of Cyber Media and co-founder Indian Angels Networks. He is a mentor and investor in multiple successful startups in his career. He also served as a global trustee of TOI in the past. With this, I am handing over the session to Pradeep to introduce the other speakers and start the session. Pradeep.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Suren. And it is indeed a pleasure for me to be conducting this session. Session is very aptly named at Disruptive Innovation because I think the theme today is disruptive innovation. You know, more and more you're finding that the various kind of disruptions that are being caused in different businesses and marketplaces, and a lot of it is led by deep technology also. I have a fantastic set of people with me. Let me introduce them quickly. I have Ravindra Kelkar, who's the VP and country manager for Citrix. He's been responsible for accelerating the business growth for Citrix in the entire subcontinent, building a robust partner ecosystem and transforming customer engagement model. He has been looking at transforming business across all different verticals of Citrix. In the past, he has been with Cisco, Microsoft, and Tech Mahindra. I also have Somer Fuken with me. Somer is a 17-year Intel veteran working across multiple roles in US, Taiwan, and India. He is currently serving as Director of Sales in Intel India, responsible for driving its growth strategies and data-centric transformation. I have Naveen Gulapalli, who is the global head for Novartis, and especially interesting to know that the entire innovation that is being driven at Novartis is based out of India, and he's the person who is driving that a lot of that innovation. So really look forward to hearing from you. Last but not the least is Puneet Chaira, Head of Marketing for Infosys. Puneet has been responsible for marketing and fintech engagement for Finical, which has been the most successful product offering out of India. And so Puneet, your experience in terms of that transformation is something that is going to be very, very important and interesting. With that, let me plunge into the discussion. Firstly, when we talk of disruptive innovation, I think it's important to understand how it is different from innovation. A lot of people get confused between the two things. And therefore, I would request if my panelists can give their views on what is the difference between innovation and disruptive innovation. Let me start with you, Ravindra.
Yeah, sure. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here to talk on my thoughts and collectively learn as a panel. As you rightly said, disruptive innovation, if we go by the classical definition, it's actually about market expansion, right? So it's about really competing against non-usage. So to think of it, there is a specific product and there is a specific market, and we can take an example of films versus the digital camera. Same thing happened that over a period of time, non-consumption was spotted, and can you now take the same product and make it more amenable for usage to a larger set of people? Is what disruptive innovation is about. It's actually about non-consumption over a period of time. The set market leaders do sustaining innovation. That means they make existing products better, and their focus is all on top tier of the customers, most profitable customers. Disruptive innovation on the other side is all about now making the same product at a better price or available in different markets, making it cheaper so that it is then addressable to more set of customers in the similar markets. That's, according to me, is what the difference between.
I come from Intel here. In the low end of the market, around 1998, Intel introduced a product called Celeron. What Andy Grove understood is that we were actually getting sidelined. You talk about incumbent customers. So there's a huge segment out there which somebody else could come and innovate and take over from us. And we kind of disrupted ourselves by cannibalizing market share of existing products and introduce this low entry product. By the time we did, by the way, we got to be about 35% of the market. So this to me is one example of disruptive innovation where you're looking at the low end of the market and disrupting the mainstream. Now the second one, if you look at new markets, which is also one area for disruption, I go back to autonomous vehicles. You take an example of Mobileye or Intel's acquisition of Mobileye, new market, right? Still to be proven. But if you go to any of the research inside, you'll see Intel's Mobileye coming as one of the top 5 players in that innovation segment. I wouldn't consider it as disruptive as yet, in the sense that it's still a small market. But again, here's probably another area of looking at new market opportunity to be disruptive. So coming back, there's a very clear definition with respect to Professor Christiansen. There's a very different segment. I'm hoping that as we go through the panel, we'll discuss more about how this works.
Sure. And good that you brought out this issue about low end and cannibalization and so on. And I think we will talk more about these also as we go along. Naveen, you are from the Novartis, and last 6-8 months have been absolutely disruptive for the entire healthcare area, which is the area that you are in. So would you like to add to this definition, especially in view of what we have seen in terms of the healthcare industry?
Right, certainly, Pradeep. So I think from a large company perspective, let me first talk about the definitions, right? So from a large company perspective, it feels that disruptive innovation is more exponential than, say, incremental innovation, right? So you have something that can, first of all, change or replace what we do, rather than improve it a little bit. One example I can give internally is using, say, artificial intelligence to replace any kind of contact center contract, right? So it can completely be virtualized or even move to a ticketless future using technology to auto-resolve queries, as opposed to process improvements, etc. So from an internal part, which is what I work in, Pradeep, in business services disruption, we can totally see multifold impact over period of time, really, as opposed to incremental, right? As far as healthcare is concerned, and of course you're right, we are living in completely disrupted times, which hopefully will get back to normal in a quarter or two. It's what the colleagues in the panel, Ravindra and Soumya, talked about, right? Something like a cell and gene therapy is a disruptive innovation, whereas you could argue that something like a molecular compound is more maybe a linear invention and innovation, right? So there's a bit of a difference. It's the scope of it, of course, the impact it can have, and the change it can bring to how we work also, right? This is what looks like disruptive innovation to me.
That's great that it should be exponential in nature. Puneet, we have talked about exponential, we've talked about new market and so on. How much of it is technology led and how much of it is business model led?
Thanks for asking a very interesting question. And I think Steve Jobs said it very nicely to your question, that the art of the most important thing in 21st century is combining technology and creativity, and that's what results into innovation. And in that sense, technology is a key enabler for innovation. We believe technologies such as cloud, AI, and API primarily have a very, very significant impact on all industries. And then there are specific technologies, industry specific, which are very, very relevant. If you think from a disruptive innovation perspective, to my mind, it's important to understand various facets of it. And the way we do it in our organization is we define innovation as anything which helps us create new stakeholder value or improve an existing value. And we call it incremental innovation as a 10% improvement, so to say, and transformational disruptive innovation as a 10x improvement. And that improvement could come in any part of the value stream. You touched upon business model. So let me put an example from a business model. If you break down a business model, the way I see it is, it has only three parts. How do you create value? How do you deliver value? And how do you realize value or package value in terms of commercials? And disruptive innovation ideas can come in any of these three, broader segments of value chain. And in different industries, it has come in different ways. Two examples I can take, which are very close to my heart, is, one, I would say Aadhaar as an extremely disruptive innovation for our country. The amount of work which has been done or the innovation we have seen so far is a great example of what a simple approach can deliver to a large population like India. And one, considering I come from banking industry, I would say UPI. It's a very simple product built on top of IMPS real-time payments, but it is so impactful in various facets of life. So to me, it's disruptive innovation doesn't necessarily mean something extremely big and bold, which has never been seen or heard before. It's not invention. It's about bringing together a variety of moving facets of evolution to create new value for stakeholders. And when the value exceeds certain threshold, it becomes disruptive. Up until that time, we can continue to call it incremental.
Wonderful. So, it could be technology led, it could be business model led, there could be different. So I think, thanks panel for creating a fantastic definition of disruptive innovation. Let me now look at, since all of you are from large corporates, let me look at the leadership and cultural challenges that often are faced by the large corporates in terms of bringing in disruptive innovation. And let me start with you, Somer. You talked about the low end. The fact is that, most of the entry that happens of new entrants is at the low end. So why is it that corporates often choose to ignore the low end?
Yeah. So,
and what's the leadership and therefore culture required for that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Pradeep, and Puneet touched a little bit upon it, right? So if you look at it, as we said, disruption is a process, right? So the incumbent gets so engrossed in meeting the needs of the existing customers that you end up ignoring certain customers who are probably low paying. That's what creates dichotomy. Okay. So when you address this, in my view, there are two parts of that conversation. One part of the conversation, in my view, is a business framework or a business model, if I could use that. And I'll give you an example. Okay. Everybody knows the iPhone, right? The success of the iPhone is not about a product, because smartphones existed. The success of the iPhone, in our view, is a function that it actually was able to network to the PC and link to the application developers. So which means suddenly it created an exponential growth of application developers and ecosystem that nobody had. So ability to rethink, as Puneet talked about, the business model is one piece. And again, coming from Intel, if you really look at how we look at it today, we have actually identified from a framework perspective 6 pillars, because a lot of people talk about software and security, right? Then it comes down to compute or processing and packaging. But end of the day, in this environment where you're talking about cost, where you're talking about latency, what have you, we think it is about the process, the architecture, the memory, the interconnect, and then the software and 60. So we have Intel have talked about 6 pieces of what fits into or innovation pillars that would get disruption in the new generation. So one part is a framework. The second part, Pradeep, all of us kind of touched upon it, is the culture. Okay. End of the day, you have to move decision making closer to people who are doing it. We call it entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. And there are areas where you go for entrepreneurship by acquisition, but entrepreneurship is key because you should be able to enable the people who are closest to the customer, right, or closest to where the decisions of purchases are getting made to be able to define things. First, identify trends and then define actions and products and solutions to meet that. So to me, those are the two things, a framework and then a culture of entrepreneurship. That would make a difference of how organizations need to change. And all of you probably would have read about it as Intel. We're going through that process. We're living the journey again right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Puneet, you are in the products area. Now, in product area, very often, you have the existing success, the gravity of itself pulling you down. That, why should I be making any change in a product? It's working well. So, how do you disrupt that?
The short answer to that is, Pradeep, we don't have a choice. The environment is such that that thinking cannot, it doesn't exist any longer. I would say that those days are gone wherein any established product vendor could be comfortable. For instance, we have 70% market share in India. 7 out of 10 banks, whether you take top 10, bottom 10 or medium 10, foreign banks, national banks run on Finical. But we also know that if we do not keep pace with the way our industry is evolving and end customers' expectations are evolving from banking system, which is dramatically changing, we won't have a future because there is a lot of other players, both the new players who are coming in as well as new models of servicing. Like, for example, in a technology industry or a banking industry, there's a model called as banking as a service, wherein a bank could actually package software and operations together and offer it to any other new player. And you can create a bank on top of it, wherein it's the same software serving variety of banks. And in that sense, instead of us being service provider, a bank could be a service provider for the next generation banks. So that choice doesn't exist. So what we do is, we know that our customers depend on us to bring new value to the end clients. So the way we are thinking about innovation is from various angles. So it is definitely incremental innovation, which is important. At the same time, transformation innovation.
Let me just interrupt you here. For example, in Fintech, thanks to COVID, now you are talking about a faceless customer.
Yep.
Right? So if you're talking about a faceless customer, it is already disrupted. So you can't make an incremental change, but there have to be major changes that need to be made.
Okay, let me just take a detour and address this part first. See, when you think of customer, and let's take banking as an example because you chose Fintech, see how things have changed. 20 years ago, more than 50% of all interactions you and I had, or even business customers had with the banks, were used to be in branches. Today, over 95% have actually moved outside branches. Forget about pandemic. Even otherwise, 95% have moved out. But the bigger news is, more than 50% of these transactions are going to move out of anything which bank owns, such as branches, online banking, mobile banking, or a chatbot, or a Facebook banking. They will all go to new set of applications where primary needs of customers are met. Like, for example, easy example is today there are 2 billion UPI transactions happening in this country. Over 85% of those transactions are managed by only 3 players: Google Pay, Phone Pay, and Paytm. It's not that others don't have. There are over 80 UPI apps available which customers can use, but only these 3 guys are. 2 of them are absolutely not a bank. One of them, you can call them because of Paytm being a payments bank now, has some connection. We believe this is just an early sign of it. The future tomorrow would be when you're buying a house, even the builder website would have a process for you to originate mortgage with any provider of your choice. You would have consent-based data sharing, which allows you to get proposal from variety of financing companies on a click without even have to step out and visit anybody in person. So I think so that's the innovation we are going to drive. To answer your question, because there's lots going to still change from what we see today as really modern, really contemporary. the next set of change is going to be more dramatic.
Great. Ravindra, let me come to you. When you start looking at leadership in a culture, in a corporate context, on one hand, there is this pressure of sustenance, right? These are the things which are most profitable, and therefore, let me push this. And on the other hand, is this disruption and cannibalization, etc., that was talked about by speakers earlier. How does leadership manage to balance both these forces which are there? I mean, you may be an FMCG and suddenly you find that, brands come in a completely different kind of model. It has happened in the past with Nirma, it has happened with let's say a Patanjali and so on. So, there is this pressure of sustenance, pressure of disruption. How do you balance that?
Yeah, good. So mostly when you talk about disruptive innovation, at least to me, or 9 in 10 times, the names come which are typically leaders who entered from low end of the market, Pradeep, as you said, right? Your question at the start was also, why does disruptive innovation come more from new entrants rather than existing players or existing dominant players per se? Very difficult for existing dominant players to do disruptive innovation per se because of good management, right? Because they are good managers, they can't disrupt themselves, right? So moving to other question of yours as to how do you manage the mix of not getting disrupted completely but still get into new markets. I can cite an example of Cisco. I worked for that company for a long time. John Chambers had this pretty good concept that I know that as an established leader, I can't be disrupting, a specific product till the time it is going to be highly probable. So one of the concepts he had is called as reverse innovation. So if there is a product leader or a business leader goes to him with some crazy idea, it's very difficult to make it successful within Cisco, right? Because the existing guys are not going to fund it and are going to oppose it because it's going to de-establish, their business. So George Chambers would then say, okay, you go out, start a new company, and I will fund. And then they had a contract to buy them back. So reverse innovation is a great way of making sure that big companies still innovate. Or second obvious idea is to form a separate subsidiary or a group company or something of that sort. But within an existing large conglomerate to keep disrupting is not really a practical idea. And we saw that in multiple cases, because disruptive innovation actually makes the leader flee rather than fight, because initially the leader feels, so it's too small a market, not profitable market, so they're happy to give it to the new entrant, right? And just be a little complacent and call it good management per se. So in nutshell, reverse innovation, setting up subsidiaries, floating new companies by the same company, right, parent company, can be some good ideas to encourage disruptive innovation within the company. Back to you, Pradeep.
Wonderful. Naveen, when we were earlier having a chat, you talked about the fact that at Novartis, you are actually driving this cannibalization. So walk us through that. What are the kind of business models through which you are doing that?
Yeah, in fact, I think as a large company, it's very important for us that we have stable, predictable, and repeatable operations, right? So to your earlier question, Pradeep, I think it's a matter of having both. We need this kind of a stable, what we call like a super tank type of operations, but we also need to disrupt and innovate. So we need speedboats around us, right? So as Ravindra was saying, maybe separate organizations, but we need to be at a place where we're trying to disrupt ourselves, because if we don't disrupt ourselves, somebody else set up. So I have people called disruptors in my team. That's their formal job role, right? So to your point on culture, it's a very different culture to the regular operations where you have repeatable, successful results. Here, it's all about trying. Failing is also fine. And then we have in my team equally some of the top 10 technology companies of the world, disruptors from their organization. So it's an ecosystem play. So it's just not Novartis, but when we are trying to create big, large, disruptive programs or products, it has to be pooling together the innovation resources of the whole ecosystem. And finally, in this group, we have a lot of startups and venture capital firms who are actually providing us these sources of cutting edge technology. So together as a coalition, we're sitting down and trying to solve our problems. And for every 10 that we attempt, one might succeed. That's very different to a typical enterprise corporate culture, right?
Yeah. So thanks, guys, for putting together this, that, there should be active way of disrupting that must be followed by corporates. And it includes tools like, disruptors, entrepreneurs, reverse innovation, cannibalization, and so on. Yet, when you actually look at the practicality of the entire thing, I find that far more of innovation comes from outside than from inside corporate structures. Perhaps because, there was a very interesting thing that somebody shared once with me, that, when you are in a corporate, you look at working within resources which are allocated to you. But when you are an entrepreneur, you do not really think of any sort of limits offered by resources, and you say, okay, fine, I've got to do this, and now let me find resources. So perhaps this is also something that needs to get disrupted in organization. But assuming that therefore a lot of innovation is going to be coming from, as you said, low end, outside, and so on, therefore there needs to be a very, very active system of working with startups. In terms of funding, in terms of providing a market, in terms of incubating, in terms of M&A, and so on. Ravindra, you were earlier talking about Cisco. Cisco had a very active policy of every month at least one company would be merged into Cisco. So that's how they were sort of reinvigorating the disruption within Cisco, So what are some of the things which your organizations are doing? This time, let me start by Somer. Would you like to go first?
Sure, Pradeep. I think the most obvious ones everybody talks about, of course, is M&A, where we work with them, we acquire them, what have you. But Intel, and specifically in India, we are running a program called Intel India Plugin. It is done in conjunction with Department of Science and Technology and IIT Mumbai. It is kind of the number one most coveted, I would say, deep tech accelerator for the country. And we have done it for 3 years, and we run it across multiple facets. Number one, of course, we work with them. We provide them the access to mentors, hardware infrastructure, what have you, so they can develop their technology to be productized. We work with them on, getting more VC funding or what have you in terms of getting additional funding sources. We work with them on one side, looking to help them with filing patents so they can create their intellectual property. At the same time, we work with them in terms of making them productized and taking them to customers. So we have this whole value chain of having a technology and guiding them to the process of converting to products and business. Very well successful. We have taken from 34 companies, 24 have gone productized. Sorry about it. Yeah, go ahead.
Are there some examples that you can share with us as to, what are some of the technologies that have been nurtured this man?
So I can talk about at least a company called Wobot for people who may have known about it. So think about Wobot as somebody who brings in edge intelligence. And we have been working with Wobot not only in terms of helping them mature and go productize, but also taking them to, I would not name the customer name right now, but think about us working with some of the large cloud service providers and Wobot to go at some of the large, I would say, transportation industry customers, where they're able to see the value of this kind of technology and work on adopting that kind of technologies. So we are working on publishing a case study around it to be shared so that at least for Wobot and all of us, it goes that. I'm just giving this as an example. So we have, as I said, we're working with about close to 60 plus of them. 22 of them are already revenue generating. With 34 startups in the firm right now over the 3 years. So we, again, being on the cutting edge of technology, that's where our DNA has been. We believe that the startup ecosystem is central to how we work and drive the technology transition, not only in a country for India. I'm giving an India example because of the panel of the audience, but that is something you'll see happening globally.
Right. So essentially, you are looking at very active acceleration program in terms of ensuring that startup ecosystem starts working with and solve practical problems.
And through the journey, from the technology innovation right to productization, and they being self-sustaining to make it grow for the ecosystem. Yes, Pradeep.
Naveen, what about you? And especially, in your area, very often the gestation period is much longer as compared to what it is in information technology. So how do you work with external startups?
Yeah, Pradeep, we are very much open for business to work with startups, right? So we have a few wings. So one is what is called a biome, which is our open space for working with early stage companies, both as an investor or an accelerator. The first one a few years back we opened in San Francisco, and I'm pleased to say that the second one is opened in Hyderabad, India. So for early stage, now we have about 7 of them in most innovative locations in the world. So we have this for early stage companies, primarily in the biotech space. And of course, the group I lead is for late stage companies where you want to try application of your product. So it's an applied innovation organization, and our doors are open. You're welcome to contact us if you think you have a product that works for a large company like Novartis.
Wonderful. Ravindra, you work with several companies. So what have been some of the things that you've seen? Examples from Citrix, from Microsoft, from Cisco.
I will combine all of them and not miss. Yeah, I'll combine all of them and not necessarily refer to a company, right? So one is obviously actively looking at adjacent markets, right? Because to be honest, on the seat you are sitting, just to throw away that seat and do something else, as I keep saying, for large companies is very, very difficult. But most of the times I have seen large companies being wanting to do disruptive innovation in adjacent markets, right? That is clearly a great way of expanding the market, because then in adjacent market you are actually disrupting somebody else and using all your might of size and all of that. So looking at adjacent markets, number one. Number two, M&M obviously is a very, very obvious choice. Number three, as you rightly said, or I think Somer said, is looking at across the value chain, right? Because there can be a broad part of something that startup eventually won't use and might be very, very useful to you, right? That may not be the final product that startup or entrepreneur launches, but there can be something that he or she wouldn't eventually use that can be looked at as well. And very, very strong integration between the R&D teams and some of these startups, right? So making sure that they are working across the value chain and things of that sort, and completely new ideas emerge. Those are the couple of 3-4 straight cuts that I would think is the answer to your question, Pradeep. Back to you.
Wonderful. So coming to you, Puneet, Infosys does have a good war chest also available with us, and therefore would you be looking very actively at mergers and acquisitions as a way of nurturing disruptive innovations?
Absolutely, and I think in last 1 year we have done more acquisitions than we have done in last 5 years as an organization, and reflection of how that's definitely an important strategy. But beyond that, we have few more initiatives to engage with startup ecosystem. As I said, one of my role is actually to drive startup engagement for banking industry. So if I give you a banking example, we have 3 programs. One is called Finical Fintech Connect, wherein anybody who's looking to have a fintech offering can participate, and the advantage we bring to them is we can help them curate their product offering further. This is our experience of working with clients in 100 countries. We can give them guidance on domain related aspects because some of the areas are highly domain intensive. And finally, of course, go to market support. And it's an open program. It's open throughout the year. Anybody can apply any point of time. Second is we know our clients are also keen to work with startups. So we have a program called Fintech Connect with our clients, wherein we invite fintechs across the globe, which while working with one or couple of our clients as well, to make them get introduced to not only Finical teams but also our clients in the other parts of the world, if that innovation or offering is relevant. Finally, we have our own marketplace called Finical App Center, again publicly available. And essentially, it's coming from a simple thinking that what we saw in consumer technology, wherein one of our panel colleague talked about how Apple changed the world by bringing a marketplace of apps rather than just taking the responsibility of all the innovation which Nokia's of the world did. So we see it's a similar journey happening on the enterprise application sites like Finical, wherein we'll bring certain set of innovations, but we will enable a lot more innovation on top of Finical by offering Finical APIs and Finical webhooks and making it easier for people to put and create bolt-on innovation. So we have our own app center wherein our clients can actually look at bolt-on innovations which they can deploy on top of Finical easily. A part of that, we have since you talked about the investments company has, we have a fund called Startup Fund Earmarked. It is available publicly, $500 million allocated only for investment, not necessarily full scale acquisition, purely from an investment perspective. So, company encourages those kind of opportunities as well. So that's really the spectrum of what we are doing to engage with startups.
That's wonderful. It's good to know that, all the four examples that have come out is that companies seem to be having now a very, very active program to engage with the entire startup ecosystem. And that's indeed a wonderful news for a whole lot of startups because, generally there has been a feeling that, earlier the money was American money and then Chinese money and so on. And the Indian corporates have generally not really been very, very supportive of the startup ecosystem in terms of, not offering them inroads into their larger ecosystems and so on. But I'm glad to hear that is something, that thinking is changing. And then hopefully that will result in huge sort of push coming to the entire startup ecosystem. I come to the last part, and I would request each of you to spend maybe a minute and a half in talking about two things. One is what really are going to be two important things that every corporate should do in terms of disruptive innovation, and one thing that you feel is going to get disrupted in your businesses. Okay. Naveen, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure, Pradeep. Thanks. So I think, I'm a living example that disruptive innovation is a must, and large corporates must also foray into this space in order to continue to be relevant, both in their products as well as in their services. The two things that I think really make it successful. First one, it's an ecosystem play. So I think the more of coalitions we can stitch together, pool resources, the better chances of success we have, and also efficient utilization of resources, right? So it's absolutely vital that when you're trying to disrupt, take any of the examples we talked about, UPI and some of the more prominent disruptors that we know around us. It is an ecosystem play. So that is an absolute must. Second is, I think, it's about culture, right? So, it should be okay to fail. And every successful project could be a failure as well, right? So if you haven't failed, you haven't innovated, is what is often said, right? So I think as companies are setting out to do disruptive innovation, you have to have very high tolerance of risk and failure, and culturally, you should promote creativity and openness, really. So I think these would be the two things. The one area that I see completely disrupting us is in healthcare is artificial intelligence, and we are seeing significant inroads already in discovery of medicines, where the capacity of AI is far more than human capacity to actually look for signals, to scout through the data. Data quality is still the biggest problem. But I think in all our areas of operations, AI is already making inroads. It's already making inroads, and I think it's going to be a huge aspect of how we operate in the future.
Wonderful. Ravindra, what are two things that corporates should do, and one area that is getting disrupted in your business?
Sure. A lot has been spoken about structure and culture, so I'll move to some new points. I think cautiously really seeing life cycle of a product, right? Because good managers become too passionate about a particular product, and then life cycle of the product has kind of finished for the consumers, but for the company it has not finished. So one is have life cycle for a product, and then the product will need a complete change. Number two, look at non-consumption. The disruptive innovations that I have seen typically happen because of non-consumption, right? You continue to innovate, you continue to do what is called as sustaining innovation, and much of your spend is actually on sustaining innovation, and it is leading to non-consumption. People are not using it, right? And that's exactly what the disruptive innovator uses to disrupt you. So looking at that, the third point, adjacent markets that I spoke about already. And then your earlier question.
Sorry, you got disrupted there.
Is it better? Is it better?
Yes, you got disrupted there.
Yeah, I know. Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. And the last thing that you had asked before was in the area that we work in, what is getting disrupted, right? What's getting disrupted is really the remote work, right? Which Citrix is enabling now. We basically feel in the way work will happen moving forward will be completely different post-pandemic. We're getting used to remote work. And that's I would call to be a huge area of disruptive innovation for so many of us, because remote work from a technology perspective means so much to Citrix to become synonymous with remote work technology, but around that there is a whole lot of ecosystem that potentially can get developed. So that would I say that's what I would say is happening in my industry, at least from a disruptive innovation standpoint. Back to you, Pradeep.
Thank you very much, Puneet.
Thanks, Pradeep. And I think I would second what Naveen said. The most important area for disruptive innovation today would be ecosystem innovation, and it's about making yourself available and making it easier for ecosystem to work with you and innovate with you. That's definitely top. The second I would say is many a times people underestimate the capabilities required to do that. And it's not so much only about culture, it's also beyond that. It's about the capability of people. Do we have people who have multidisciplinary?
Sorry,
Then there's a lot about technology and data. Naveen also touched upon it, importance of that from an AI perspective. That's super critical to put in place. And then, of course, the entire processes and tools required to go through the entire journey of innovation, from defining a problem to ideating to validating to prototyping, testing, etc. And having certain set of structured programs, which we discussed in our conversation earlier, which makes it easier for companies to actually have not only disruptive innovation, but also a big pipeline of ongoing innovation. So those will be the two things. In terms of what is disrupting our business, I think it's about consolidation in the banking industry. We see the big consolidation programs happening in public sector banks, but as digital banking progresses, there'll be need for lesser and lesser number of banks, because the reach is not limited by the physical infrastructure. And I think that will be a big disruption for players like us, because you would have lesser and lesser customers to serve with our software.
And Somer?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the conversation we started with. Disruption is a process, and there are two markets that's happening. One is it's the low end opportunity and new markets. So I think the most important thing in our view is customer obsession. The more you stay close to the customer and you really put them first, you'll be able to understand what they need and react to that. The second piece is, and I think all of us touch a little bit, is agility. You can know the trend, but if you're not agile enough to react, it's not going to happen. So I think if you have agility, and we can use different words for it, and customer obsession, that would be the two key things defining where you can foster disruptive innovation. Talking about the industry, Pradeep, coming from the computation industry, instead of discrete computational blocks, it is becoming a continuum. And you talk about 5G, AI, a lot of us touch upon it, right? Computation is now becoming a continuum from the consumer who could have a phone or a PC to the edge to the backend data center cloud. The biggest two vectors that I think would make a difference is security, because you really need to be able to make sure that there's a transparency of security across that continuum. And B, you really have to be open. All of us talked about ecosystem. To make that ecosystem work, you have to support open standards. So going vertical on a proprietary structure versus what we believe the open standards will be the disruption. So those is what I think is going to happen. Open standards and security. Those are the two things that will be disruptive.
That's really wonderful. With that, gentlemen, I would like to thank you for this absolutely wonderful panel discussion where we looked at what really are the internal things that corporates need to do, how they should engage with the external ecosystem. And I hope some of this can actually go in terms of transforming the way disruptive innovation is looked at by corporate India, and we can establish a new paradigm which results in great interaction between the startup ecosystem as well as the corporate ecosystem. With that, over to you, Suresh.